So good evening. I'm Robert Polito from the New School Writing Program, and it's my immense pleasure to welcome you to this latest evening in collaboration with Cave Canem Poets on Craft. At the New School, I want to thank Lori Lynn Turner for all her hard work and good work in making tonight possible. And I want to thank all of our friends at Cave Canem, particularly Allison Myers and Camille Rankin. In addition to thanking Camille, I want to congratulate her here publicly on her 2010 PSA Chapbook Fellowship, and you can read all about it here in this beautiful essay by Cornelius Eady, an American poet, the magazine of the Academy of American Poets. So it's a sort of double pleasure tonight to welcome Camille, who will introduce the rest of the evening. Camille.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Robert, for that intro. That's so sweet. My name is Camille Rankin. I'm the Program and Communications Coordinator for Cave Canem Foundation. For those of you who are not familiar with us, Cave Canem is a national organization dedicated to cultivating the artistic and professional growth of African American poets. Since 1996, Cave Canem has been working to build a home for Black poetry in many sites across the country. We have a lot of great programs like this one throughout the year, including a reading coming up this Thursday at the Studio Museum in Harlem, featuring Cave Canem Fellows Kyla Marshall, L'Oreal Snell, and Michelle Whitaker, so I hope you can join us for that. You can pick up information about us and our programs at the table in the back, or you can also sign up for our mailing list to receive updates from us, and you can learn more about us, ways to support us, and what we're up to at our website at cavecanempoets.org. So I'd like to thank our hosts and co-sponsors for the evening, the New School for General Studies, especially Robert Polito and Lori Lynn Turner of the New School Writing Program. I'd just like to thank our funders, a New York City Department for Cultural Affairs, New York Council for the Humanities, and the New York State Council on the Arts, and New York Community Trust Lila Atchison Wallace Fund for the Arts. And of course, thanks to all of you for coming out this evening. Tonight is Poets on Craft, our series that was launched in 2008 to showcase work of accomplished poets in the early to mid stages of their careers, and to provide an opportunity for readers and writers to deepen their engagement with exciting new directions in American poetry. Tonight we're excited to be featuring Kazim Ali and Lyrae van Clief-Stefanon. We start off with a brief reading, followed by a moderate conversation and time for Q&A at the end. And I hope you join us afterwards for refreshments and a book signing, books that are on sale in the back, so I hope you will be buying as well. And I just want to, also we have surveys for you this evening that we hope you'll fill out. It really helps us with our funders to keep programs like this going. So they're going to be in the back. You can fill them out and return them in the back as well, so that would really help us out. We'd appreciate it. So I'm just going to start out by introducing our poets for the evening, starting with Lyrae van Clief-Stefanon. Lyrae van Clief-Stefanon is the author of two collections of poems, Open Interval, a 2009 National Book Award finalist, and Black Swan, winner of the 2001 Cave Canem Poetry Prize. Her verse has been called clear and majestic and important by Lucille Clifton, and ecstatic lyric ritual grace under extreme pressure realized by Michael Harper. She's assistant professor of English at Cornell University. Kazim Ali's work has been called at once clear and complex, rigorous and charming, accessible and demanding. He's the author of two books of poetry, The Far Mosque, winner of the Alice James Books New England, New York Award, and The 40th Day, the novels Quinn's Passage and the Disappearance of Seth, and Bright Felon, Autobiography and Cities, a collection of lyric essays. He's the assistant professor of creative writing at Oberlin College and teaches in a low residency program, MFA program at the University of Southern Maine. So please join me in welcoming Lyrae van Clief-Stefanon.
Thank you all so much for coming out, and it's good to see so many good friends out in the audience this evening, and people still coming in. That's great. I'm taking my cues this evening from this exhibit that I didn't know was gonna be here when I got here, but I found it really interesting when I came in particular this hunger here behind me. And so I think I'm gonna start off with can everybody hear me? I'm gonna start off with a sestina called The Buffet Dream. I was saying to my friends earlier, I'm kind of in the crazy today. And one of the things that comes out in my poems is an obsession with the swamp. The swamp is so like kind of representative of desire for me, that like kind of overwhelming. It's like kind of take you over and suck you down and pull you in and all of that. And so hunger, hunger, hunger. The buffet dream. In the buffet dream, this is what I want. Everything I can swallow. What is hot, what is cooked, what is sweet, what will fit on my plate, what will drive me from sleep with longing. This is hunger. Before the first bite crosses my tongue, waking. The colors of dream are there at 17, each day waking to promise of silk and open sky, the gift of truancy. Who doesn't want flutter and slap of wind and parachute, foreign men falling from Icarus heights, a girl's hunger for their sweat and the vowels they swallow, their neon canopies, their endless drifting, the pull of sleep. I could taste everything, I could taste everything, the whole of this world, the idea sweet as leaving home, as being where I'm not supposed to be, sweet as desserts in the dream, silver bowls of fresh berries and sabayon, as waking just once to bright lemon tarts with single sprigs of mint, someplace where sleep has wrought miracles. 17, coarse salt of want on my tongue, I set out for the territories, hope to swallow all, at least, every drop zone I can find, a black girl on the river, hunger, as free as that. I cannot leave this river, hunger snakes along its slumbery route, slow as sweet syrup, seeks low ground, overflows, swallows a field, seeps into its green and makes it swampy, waking the sticky, spongy air, summer's silty edge, wanton, dripping, a humid decade's night sweat, a constant of sleep, until I am in Africa. In Cameroon, involontaire, sleep-deprived, listening to the dogs scratch hunger out on Bafusam's abundant trash piles, I want the 19-year-old boy I snatched like a muddy reed from some sweet yielding bank 4 years back, dreaming satiety, waking 28, purple-mouthed from boxed wine and desire. Swallow the St. John's, the Susquehanna, swallow the Maury, the Loam and Jerem, swallow the Atlantic you crossed, chasing bright-dyed dandelion seeds to find sleep, a glass display case of Napoleons and air pies, an eclair filled with waking. Empty-handed on its ever-rocking waterbed, hunger waits you out, waits you. It's possible you've tasted every sweet nothing your mind can offer. That delicious list you wanted, licked down to nothing, swallowed. Freedom, nothing. The fancy cake's hunger designed, decked out in fondant ribbons. Sleep, a night's mouth filled with something sweet. What each morning, waking, you know you will still want. This next poem has not been published anywhere yet, and so this will be a first. This next poem is called Miss Anne.
Flies from my mother's mouth, an apparition. What does it mean? What's in a name? When I say I, Miss Anne, you mistake me for an apparition. I cannot anger her, see her in her apparition, human form, some teacher, some stranger. What does acquitted mean? But apparition. My mother could not bear it, the thought of having arranged for her apparition. Arrangement. But where's the music for this? This ghost, nothing, a bitch, pissing in every corner of my house, claw, hammer, and apparition. Now ask your mammy, now it's gonna get nasty, breaking up Christmas with apparitions. Vanilla sandwich cookies on a pretty plate. A real dulcimer and apparitions, soaked in swamp water, soaked in mud, a backlog burning your apparitions. For your white girlfriends, it's all relative. These are my relatives, apparitions. You mean to tell me you can't tell the difference? Here I am, double or nothing, this apparition.
This is my friend and collaborator, Emily Stark-Minnig, and we've been doing a lot of stuff together. And I really want to thank her for doing that poem with me. When I wrote that poem, Miss Ann, it was one of those things that I was like, I'm writing this poem, Miss Ann. And she's like, I'm terrified of that poem, and I'm not going anywhere near it. And I said, yes, you are. So thank you, Emily. BOP, the North Star. Auburn, New York. I should say, after all of her trips back and forth on the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman settled in a town about an hour from me called Auburn, New York. And I teach poetry workshops in a maximum security men's prison there. And so I have to drive past Harriet Tubman's house to get to the prison. BOP, the North Star. Auburn, New York. Polaris sits still in the sky, and if I knew which one it was, I would follow it all the way to Auburn. Oh, Harriet, who did not need the poise of freedom knocked into your head like sense, who found it more than possible to sleep, pistol shoved deep into your pocket along this route. I cannot tell a dipper from Orion. Yes, the springtime needed you. Many a star was waiting for your eyes only. The university twinkles on the hill above my house. The fat moon rises and a girl holds out her arms. She twirls in a blue Polly Flinders dress, Mama's precious cameo, a white woman's silhouette on black satin ribbon, choker tied around her neck. Poise begins here, in cinders, in rhyme, in splintering beauty into this and this. The image at my throat, the summer's pitching constellations, the 10 o'clock scholars' midnight lesson. Yes, the springtime needed you. Many a star was waiting for your eyes only. At the prison at Auburn, I cross the yard. Inmates' wet tongues against my body, cement sculpted, poised for hate, pitch compliments like coins. Wade their silver slickening in the water, uncollected change. A guard asks, think they're beautiful? Just wait till they're out here stabbing each other. Oh, Harriet, the stars throw down shanks. Teach the sonnets a cell. Now try to escape. Yes, the springtime needed you. Many a star was waiting for your eyes only. Lost. The river, unrolled bolt of silk, gives evening the smell of fish, wet leaves, loosening matter. We glide through its blue plum tint towards night, the leftover tang of red wine in our mouths. Upstream, an idea waits for us. If we were lost, how much more would we love each other? We four move toward this losing with the steady creak and drip of our rowing. We cannot, in lowering darkness, tell direction, whether the frog's croak came from behind or before us. Our bellies full, the swamp beckons us behind its green drapery. Whatever hides in the tangle, the surprise of cypress knees, the fierce, sharp-edged palms welting our forearms as we walk blind through mottled nights, sulfur rot, and sucking mud. What flies into our mouths, impossible to see. Mosquitoes lighting in our ears, their constant whine, high-pitched and crazy-making. The silent patience of gators and our wary estimation of their hunger. We will keep, we are certain, as we lose ourselves for hours, when we find ourselves again bankside and two must choose to swim because we're not where we began. The river moves despite our stillness, our breath breathing itself into the wet heat. Whether they disappear for good, the two who splash away, their heavy kicking swallowed by this evening. I am of the two who wait, waist high in water, eyes stretched wide to see, nothing but night washing itself, black over black, in muggy layers, inches from my face. Not my hands, skin of water, curve of meniscus, my breasts where I displace it, my undissolved legs, immersed, merged with water, losing above, in, out of, but for these hands sliding over me, another's hands to keep me from becoming current tongue, lisp of leaf tips touching water, but for we too, touching, agreeing, this is my body, agreeing I still belong in it. R.R. Lyrae, matter. I should say R.R. Lyrae stars are pulsating variable stars. They expand and contract and as they brighten and dim, and so they're a useful tool for determining distances. R.R. Lyrae, matter. He still exists as flesh. It's the idea that's dissipated. Husband, what was he? But a word I loved. There is no panacea for missing syllables. His body, we all know what matter's mostly made of. Space obtains. One day I realize, I believe. The space in everything is God, that force of present absence, pen expands. I grieve old-fashioned distance, squinting it into view. Between body and name, in here I'm loose as love is, nebulous. What good, this pointillism, our eyes won't do. Sometimes the absences in us seem so profuse. I wonder we don't pass through wood. R.R. Lyrae, will. When I am dead, I may not remember the mess of purple irises in the neighbor's garden, or the way I leaned against their fence to look at him. Lost to rot, the body, and the soul, this is not the time, nor the place. I will die when it's no longer possible for this body to show itself best. It makes me sad, the things I wanted. Love's gorgeous force, a tight fat cloud of blue, hydrangea, someone coaxed the soil to color. The universe, cancer of the hallelujah. My name in his mouth, an arrogance of vapor, a star diminished, sucked down into paper. R.R. Lyrae, sign. Past breath, external, past gesture, a field, the empty space pressed up between the ends of fingers and my face that I extend out into openness, a thing I build against silence. Dear John, this letter penned in air, a self, in space, a name I find in your hand. You, a listener, a child, and more than 220 years deaf and dead. You don't know me from Eve, and yet you write me down. A field. It stretches out before us, black and infinite and starred as myth. Dear Phyllis, it does not contain its ends, but signs, the way a name expands. I want to say this poem with my hands. Thank you.
Sarah's Promise by Lucille Clifton. Who understands better than I the hunger in old bones for a son? So here we are, Abraham with his faith, and I, my fury. Jehovah, I march into the thicket of your need and promise you the children of young women, yours for 1,000 years. Their faith will lead them to you. Now, speak to my husband. Spare me my one good boy. Hi, how are you? I think there is a theme. We are both young and stylish and have fabulous hair. That is why we were paired. I'm gonna do an Icarus poem too, because your first poem mentioned Icarus. So this is called The Escape. Father, whose purpose swims while the universe mends itself, wind was water, porpoise was prophet. Father, my swim, the sutured, eventual blue collapses. Seed planter, hedonist, heathen when the unwise son fell to pieces, purposeless when the father flew for cover. The cloven will cleave, the water finishes itself, finishes me. Stream, unreeling, you are the end of the world, the endless horizon. And I think it's a sham, this charnel choice between heaven and home. Because finally, free of the labyrinth, and overhead, nothing but sky. Poor Icarus. Poor Icarus. I would read a poem from my book, The Far Mosque. I'm sorry, I went to this reading at AWP once in Palm Springs, 2001, and I was there, and she read, and she went, and she just took her big bag up with her to the podium, and she made some comment about not leaving her purse anywhere. So I take my inspiration from her. My big old bag here. Okay, this poem is called Dear Rumi. Dear Rumi, you have forgotten the other life in which Shamse Tabriz threw your books into the fountain, and the ink, finally unrecognizable, reached for you with dissipating lust. Once, I went up the mountain at daybreak, and still I met pilgrims coming down who had woken for the journey earlier. In the tomb of not Shams, I prayed and prayed to be not found. Am I the sun inside me? Shams will walk out the back door and never return, and you will go mad and spend years looking for him, until one day in the marketplace, estranged and weeping, you will understand the farthest mosque is the one within, and that the sun in the sky is not the one you orbit around, nor the one who went out the back door and never returned. Somewhere in the world now, every minute, a sun is dropping over the horizon into yesterday. At the fountain in the village square, the books are still sinking, bereft of your hands. Even the mountains are bending down to try to save them. Dear Shamse Tabriz, I do not mourn. You spindle me, sun thorn, to the sky. This reminds me of a poem that I want to read from my new manuscript that is called Launch. You know, I lived in the Hudson Valley for many years, and there's this thing in the Hudson Valley, it's called the river cloud, and what happens is because the river runs through highlands, the river evaporates into the air, and there's this thick cloud, and it just snakes along the river. It's very strange. It's the river, but it's in the air, in fact. So this is Launch. Oh, it's funny that I told you all about the river cloud because there's nothing to do with the river cloud in this poem, in fact. But a little knowledge is always a good thing. So this is another Icarus, sort of. The arc of my new manuscript of poems follows Icarus all the way through, and he sinks in all this drama, and then it goes back to the beginning where he's about to launch they're leaving. Bye. Have fun. Okay. Launch. Unmake yourself year by year. Your urge surges in your ear. No purpose at all, but dispersal. Lost in the labyrinth, desperate to wring yourself dry of lust. Wanting exhalation to mean disappearance. In the space between lightning and thunder, fling yourself skyward, sunstorm. A hagiography of feathers glued to your sin-singed skin, arrowing sunward like a sun on fire, singing the whole way. I'm leaving you behind, a ghost of a prayer. I'm leaving you behind, shining thread. I'm sorry, I just have to keep looking down at my watch compulsively. This is a poem. My partner is a farmer and a gardener, and so we talk about bees a lot. You don't hear about the bees as much anymore, but they are still disappearing. The road at Ache. I was whispered along the road at Ache toward the sun-puddled gate. I might be the sum of yearning for whatever makes you emptier, better weather, the absence of bees, but the year tells it better, all the hives unraveling into summer, little mouths flooding the May air to stillness. My telling tints the blue air whiter, a storm white, open ear, listening to what will unspool next, clover, apple trees, and to what I owe the mysterious reciter arriving, driving out, dry, the flood month, spelling me in every direction, unclear but swarming, given this my year to hear. This is a poem that I wrote in response to Agha Shahid Ali's poem, Barcelona Airport. And the epigraph to Barcelona Airport was, this was pre-September 11th, I'm assuming. But the gate agent asked him, apparently this is a true story. If you knew Shahid, you would probably believe it's a true story. The gate agent asked him, "Are you carrying anything that can be of any danger to the other passengers?" And Shahid responded, "Only my heart." So this poem is called Fragment because it doesn't have a beginning or an end, actually. Adrift on cloud terrain, having forgotten my suitcase, boarded the wrong plane. All the ghost writing goes away. The cold rain stones, the sky's bleak shelf. I trade myself here for a necklace of acorns or a little tree. Second state is awareness. Third state is waking dream. Echoes of riverbed, ocean floor, drying quickly, spirit uncle, residue, Scotch bonnet, Jesus lizard passing through. Nothing follows the courses to argument or what nothing knows. Where we're going, nothing will wonder. I'm going to read a short little piece from my book, Bright Felon, which is a really hard book to actually excerpt from because the whole thing was written together. But chapter by chapter, each chapter is a city that I lived in, and in it I was trying to grapple with issues of spirituality, sexuality, and all kinds of other things. This chapter is about Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where I lived for several years. Carlisle, Pennsylvania, of course, home of the Army War College, the infamous Carlisle Indian School, and each chapter bleeds backwards and forward in time, and including this chapter, it sort of bleeds into the story of Hagar near the end. Hagar, I think in Judeo-Christian tradition, is the concubine, but in Islamic tradition, she was the first wife. And Hagar was African. I don't know if she's African in the Bible, but in the Quran she is. And her cenotaph is buried right next to the Kaaba, which is the mosque at the heart of Mecca. And so people make pilgrimage to Mecca because there was a sort of meteorite. Someone else is leaving. There was this meteorite that fell out of the sky. Oh, he's just going back to the table. He's not really... this meteorite fell out of the sky, and that meteorite is embedded into the side of the mosque. And so that's what people, they circumambulate the mosque, and they touch that black stone that fell from the sky. Carlisle. And I'll close with this piece. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to having our conversation as well. It'll be really fun. Carlisle. Because what I think is that this tender beast, brown-skinned animal, grotesque and lustful, is me and my immortal soul besides. In Carlisle, I have 2 writing desks, one on each side of the apartment. Both of these I bought with money from my first real job when I moved north of the city to Rhinebeck, a part of the story I haven't gotten to yet, though it was already years ago. Always in the broken story, there is more to tell. Mornings, I rise in the cold and walk 2 blocks down to the old colonial graveyard to read the history of the place. The history of any place for me is simple. A route between my home on South Bedford Street, across the main intersection to the coffee shop on the corner of Pitt and High. The other compass points are the independent bookstore, the house on Hanover Street where Marianne Moore lived, and a strange park that was once a graveyard on the north side of town, a place where the land was broken and the bones disturbed. Details on the display plaques in that park are sketchy and lead me into shadowed places, the town records, rooms I've never been. But I don't discover that small park until near the railroad tracks with its distressing history until I've lived in this town more than 7 months. In the body of a tree, I hear a resonance, while out in space between planets lie cores of planets. An iron fence grows through the heart of the tree. I pass it every morning as I walk. What I learned is that each asteroid is held in careful place by a partner in space, and that if such a body didn't exist, the orbital patterns of these same can be extrapolated graphically. A discovery which pleases me almost as much as the day I learned that every cubic equation actually has an associated modular form. It's true. But what has all this to do with Carlisle, Pennsylvania, once a frontier town, but constructed at the frontier with specific intent to push the boundaries of the state out to Cumberland Pass? The county jail, Gothic, red stone, still stands at the corner of Bedford and High Streets. Though it is offices now, the inside's completely refurbished. You have to squint at it to be fearful, though death it still tells. A white man who was crushed in riots when he sued for the return of 2 of his slaves that had escaped north. I need to check whether or not he won his case. To live in a frontier town, at any rate, or a town that was built on what was supposed to be the frontier. Later, all the promises were broken, and the settlements spread out into the territories. It is always the broken that holds the universe in place. That's what I would say about poetry and prayer, that God or audience, the intended direction of both of these, we wish and wish, are real. In the mornings of the late fall, when it is cold enough to feel the winter beginning, I would leave the house very early and walk south on Bedford into the old cemetery, the closest place I can come to a city piled on top of a city. It's not like that in Cairo, where the city sedimented itself and we walked down the Greek streets themselves, saw churches hidden underground, accessible only by otherwise unmarked staircases in empty courtyards. Through the cemetery, I read the fate of the village, the deaths, the family trees, the broken headstones, how we will all break. When I speak about my body's life, I know it is brothered and descended from, but do not know if blood will descend from my blood. Does a family break, or can it, like water, evaporate and condense? And so will I then be a father in a million different ways? Leaving the cemetery, I walk through the old districts to the north side of town. And after crossing the railroad tracks, I find a park there, which is really another cemetery, or was. The graves now all dug up, replaced by this small green patch. One grave surrounded by an iron fence remains. The granddaughter of this man lived across the street, and so when the park was planned, she battled to have this grave protected, and so it was. The others, descendantless, have disappeared, the headstones shattered and removed, the ground planted over. As I walk, I realize likely the bodies and bones still remain deep underground, still dissipating. And you know, without explanation, whose graveyard that was torn up. You understand the color of their skin that enabled their desecration and what station they occupied in this community while they lived. Why should I spell out every little thing? There are things about a person's body you do not know, the things it craves and loves, all the sordid things we never tell. Carlisle, where soldiers are trained and Indians were brought to be forced to forget. Never did I think when I arrived there that it would be the place I would dare to actually speak. Nothing happened there but time, going in the morning to the coffee shop to read or write, how ordinary the most important things are. The green copper roofs of the buildings against the steel blue gray of central Pennsylvania sky, the rain-wet street in the palm of your hand is always what you promised, and what you promised is to understand. I thought I wouldn't get there unless I spoke, unless I told about the people I love, the picture I drew against the corner of the room. And what I'm trying to explain is how fully silence can fill every space. To drown in a river or to lift the water up and let the drowning be your guide. I trudged along the street unbaptized and criminal according to some religious laws, a lonely brother, the middle child, the only son. Is it written on your skin, my friend asks? Is that why you could never go on pilgrimage, never go to Mecca? But why would I want to go to Mecca? Because there a stone fell from the sky? More important than that small thing, that is where a mother refused to believe. A mother refused to believe the obvious. I am alone in the desert with my son. He rattles, his breath rattles in his throat. We have been left here by the patriarch who promised to return. He left us and we were promised by God to safety. That is the question of faith on the frontier. You were promised deliverance, yet there you are, no water in sight. Do you sit and wait for the angel to either spell it out into your ears or perhaps write it onto your skin? Yet I think it is already written on my face, written into every corner as many times as I could say it. There must be water around here somewhere. Yet it isn't panic to leave a baby, even then in the moment of dying. And that is how it happened. God wouldn't spell it out. Rather, the water came exactly where she put the boy down. Only after she risked it all for the impossible. Water in the desert. In the desert, the mother was left. She had to decide. Do you wait for God to tell you what to do? Or do you panic? Thank you.
Okay, so I remember when we first planned this event, it was in February, and it ended up being just after the passing of Lucille Clifton. And you had both expressed a desire to speak about her, and you started with one of her poems. So I thought, why not just, again, revisit that? Maybe, I know you both have mentioned her as an influence on your poetry, so maybe you can talk a little bit about what kind of effect she's had on your work.
Well, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
I was incredibly inspired by her work when I first encountered it. And what the work of hers that I first came across was the biblical retellings that were in Good News About the Earth, I think. There's a section called Some Jesus. Do I have that right? And it was really inspiring to me reading about Job and Jonah and all of these figures, but sort of like from an alternative political perspective, and they were all black as well. And so as a member of a marginalized community, I guess you would say, and also being Muslim, so marginalized on top of marginalized, and marginalized within my Muslim community, I sort of related to that idea of those figures writing back, or that idea of reclaiming the canonical descriptions. And this is a long time before I discovered Alicia Ostreicher's work with Old Testament discussion as well, where she tries to sort of see what the alternative sides of these were. So that was a really powerful moment for me. And then much later, I became very influenced by her actual prosody and orality and all of those things. I mean, I could talk endlessly about it, but I'd say that was the first point that really kind of seized me, and then she did the Book of David and Terrible Stories. So she continued to kind of take these figures that have always represented, for lack of a better way of saying it, but it's true, that represented white power, and sort of presented the other side, the side that spoke to this other experience.
Yeah, for me, Miss Lucille was like such a huge influence, such a huge influence on my work and on my life. I had the great good fortune to be able to study with her at Cave Canem in 1998 in Esopus, and the reading that she did that night, it was Lucille Clifton, Sonia Sanchez, and Toy Derricott read together there in the monastery, and that will stand up like for forever as one of the most amazing events of my life. When Miss Lucille recited the "Won't you come celebrate with me what I've tried to shape into a kind of life," I mean, hers are the only words that I've ever considered like tattooing on my body, like that line from that poem, "What did I see to be except myself?" Like that is so Lucille Clifton for me. So the entirety of Open Interval is, and in homage to her, the Book of Light is all about, Miss Lucille writing about her name. And so that's why I wrote Open Interval. I was like, okay, well, Miss Lucille's writing about, Lucille in the Book of Light. Well, let me like write about Lyrae and see like light and like kind of see what I can do with that. She was such a great influence and such a great mentor, and so like kind and like would hold you like her own, in this way that was like just so important to me. So I miss her.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the rewriting of biblical stories and tying that into the position of a marginalized, being marginalized in a certain society. And I noticed that, you're writing this book of Icarus poems now, and I see that in your work as well, the rewriting of mythology. Do you feel like, as minority writers, that this is something that you're drawn to? I see this in both of your work, and I wonder if that's a part of the relationship, if it's kind of giving a different voice to these people that have been understood a certain way. What is your relationship to that kind of poem?
That's kind of what I started doing in the very beginning, and I became really interested in these dominant mythologies and finding the truth, quote unquote, in them a little bit. But that period was very brief, and then I ran away from it because I felt like, well, I'm still giving centrality to those stories, and I'm not interested in giving centrality to those stories, and so I didn't do very much of that at all. Icarus kind of called out to me because something's happening behind us.
Whoa. Anyway.
The white god is putting his vengeance on us. But then Icarus called out to me because I wrote this book about coming out, Bright Felon, and Icarus himself was kind of a bright felon. I mean, he was the boy who dared to tell his, to disbelieve his father's strictures and aim for the sun, So he's a little gay boy who was, you know what I mean? And so that was me. And so when I was trying to come to terms with my father, I thought, I don't really want to write about that yet. I'm not there yet, but I will write about the experience of being that boy, wings aflame, plummeting for the ocean surface, which is what it felt like, certainly when I was growing up and when I was coming out, to face, what happened. And Icarus drowns. I mean, there's no end. There's no, you can't rescue him. So. Right. But I thought I would try. So, yeah.
Mythologies were always really big for me, I think in part because when I was younger, there was a kind of a forbidden sense to them because I was raised Pentecostal. And so like other gods and everything were not, my mama was not big on other gods, but my mom was big on like pronouncements and stories and things like that, and things that get passed down. I'm so interested right now in what's going on behind us and stuff. It was really interesting to me, the screen coming down to block it out. But one of them is this picture of this small boy here and the text that's under it, in terms of mythologies and informing people's lives and things like that. And that poem, Miss Anne, comes out of that was a term that my mother used to use, and so like there are these mythologies that like kind of get, big in your life, and you have to kind of do things with them. There's a poem in Black Swan which is full of retellings of classical and biblical women's stories, but the poem that is actually called Myth is actually about my mother and my mother's illness and my mother's death. How it's something that happened when I was a small girl. My mother had hyperthyroidism, which was treated with cobalt radiation, which in turn gave her cancer. So she was supposed to die when I was really young, and there was a point at which she entered the hospital, and her family was pretty certain that she wasn't going to come out, that she was going to die, and the Pentecostalism all came from that hospital stay. She's in the hospital. She's supposed to die. They tell her, lady, you're going to die. And she says, I'm leaving here. I'm going home to raise my kids. And she tells her cousin, if you don't drive me home, then I'm going to call a cab. And she comes home and she pours the last of the bottles of wine that she has in her house down the toilet and throws away her last joint or like kind of whatever and becomes this super Christian, and then this is how she raises us. And so that story becomes like this larger than life story that you have to contend with as you're growing up. And so mythologies in not just the classical and the Euro mythologies or the biblical stories or everything, but like the notion of a mythology, this as a mythology, really has always really has stuck with me and been big.
So it's kind of like the reclaiming of a received idea and like rewriting that. Talking about this wall.
Yeah.
I noticed that I think both of you respond a lot to visual art. And I just, maybe you could talk about a little bit about if you feel like you're influenced a lot by visual artists, and how that figures into your work, and how do you respond to that?
I feel like I'm hugely influenced by not just visual artists, but artists, of all stripes. But it feels really funny, like kind of to be a poet in the world and to say, well, I need to go and do research. Like I need to go. There's this exhibit at the Guggenheim, and I need to go and see it so I can write poems. And like kind of trying to convince people that that's a valid thing. Like convince your university that that's a valid thing to ask for money for. Like I need to go and see those Kandinskys, or I need to go to. Did you all go and see This Progress? When it was there at the Guggenheim, when they took all it was the performance piece where the people came and had a conversation with you as you're going up the stairs. It was this like kind of amazing thing. But things like that, like there's a poem that I'm writing now called, strangely enough, Porn, that is influenced by that. I feel like I need to interact with art and artists in order to be able to make art. And I don't think that that's a strange concept, but the world seems to think that it's a strange concept somehow.
Well, I'm with you. I don't think it's strange at all.
Yeah, I saw that there was I don't know if it's still there, but last month anyways, there was an abstract expressionist show at MoMA. And I had this experience 10 years ago when I lived in New York. There was a show at the Met of Hans Hofmann's so-called Renata series, the last 10 paintings that he painted. After his first wife died, he had a second wife that was much younger, and he had the flowering of his old age or something like that, and created these 10 paintings that normally don't get exhibited together, but they were collected by the Met. And I kind of had this sort of one of those paradigm shifts that I don't really feel like I've quite gotten over, having seen all those paintings yet. It resonates in all of these different ways. And there are these certain touchstones, like I went and saw a Butoh dance performance at BAM several years ago that still sort of haunts my dreams. And I can tell you exactly the first moment when I first heard Yoko Ono sing, and it was sort of like this thing that shifted my reality a little bit. So these are these little threads. Like there's that scene in Mrs. Dalloway where Richard and the others go and have lunch with the rich lady, and then she falls asleep, and they leave, and there are these, Virginia Woolf describes it as these strings that are going out from her, and they're like walking along, and they're still living inside her, sort of. And so I feel like I have these strings to these different places that are still in my mind that I haven't gotten over yet. Yeah.
Do you, I feel like I have this conversation with my friends who are poets about the different effect that poetry has than other mediums. How do you feel that poetry's effect and role compares to that of visual art or music? How do you feel that people react or respond differently, or think of it differently than those other mediums?
Well, I think that one of our great cultural crises at the moment is kind of a turning away completely from art for art's sake, I guess you could say. Art as this sort of sacred, let's put that word in quotes, but still a sacred practice that can contain and also create reality. True reality, meaning the human body as the carnate container of a universal spiritual experience, the universe as a collective identity, every person in this room as the same person, and that art is a sort of a connective or a hardwiring that can help that to happen. So when Keanu is like in the hallway and he looks at the agents and he sees everything as code, it's this moment, you know what I mean?
He sees it and then he flexes it.
He sees it and then he flexes
That's
it, yeah.
He's like the whole room just
The
goes,
whole room.
Yeah.
And he, and then the flip side is what happens next, of course. I won't spoil the ending. And so it has like this idea of this connection, and art as that thing that passes us between each other, and it's moved more and more to the commodification of, including those of us who practice it, like to see it as something that is containable, or that it enters the exchange value. I mean, we sometimes say, like, well, poetry is not as corruptible because there's no money attached to it. But we know the varying levels of lie in that statement already, just by saying it out loud. And so I think that we've all, like, just not we, just us, but socially have moved so far away. And I think we're just in shit trouble because of it, you know, on a huge, larger scale. I mean, we can just not see the connection between what we are doing, this idea of karma or kismet or anything, like we're uncoupled, you know what I mean? We're just out to lunch, I think, spiritually, as a universe, not like as individual people. So I don't know, I'm not as pessimistic as I sound at exactly the moment, but I think that we really, the next 100 years are going to be just an interesting time for the species, I think.
I'll give you the flip of that. Then if
Okay.
you're feeling, I'll sound more optimistic than
Help
I
me
usually
out, help me
sound.
out.
Because I think for one thing, it's really neat that you threw that matrix reference in there, because, okay, so here's this commodity, here's this commodified thing and stuff, and that's out there, and we're dealing with the commodification of everything, right? But I use that very scene that you're talking about all the time to talk to my kids about poems. Like that, I'm saying to them, I want you to be able to see the matrix and flex it. Like, this is what I want you to be able to do. And the possibility of the art itself, despite the commodification that's going on, still being able to to stand and be that thing that you're talking about. And it makes me think of things like George Carlin talking about how we just treat the earth so badly. And I don't know if you remember this old George Carlin routine where he's like, the earth will shake us off like a bad cold, like maybe the earth wanted plastic. Like, that's what we're here for. And then once it gets its plastic, it's going to be like, enough of you and we're gone, and so like that sense of like there's the possibility of the art just despite the commodification and despite everything being able to do the things that it does. I'm really in this like kind of strange, like kind of crazy writing space right now where these things that are going through my head are like obsessively making me write. One of them is this little moment in a mixtape by Lil Wayne. I don't know if y'all ever have heard I'm Acting Brand New. Anybody in here heard I'm Acting Brand New? It's from a mixtape. And that in and of itself is interesting to me, the difference between the studio album and the mixtape, and what gets released like officially and what doesn't. And so there's this Lil Wayne song. It's not out, but it's on this mixtape. It's called I'm Acting Brand New. And he says this line. Before he says the line, though, he just says, huh. And then he says the line. And it's that, huh, that is obsessing me right now, because it's kind of like he heard what he just said, and then he anticipates himself, the line, the fresh, like, awesome. I'm aging myself. I said fresh. Like, I felt all, the kids don't say fresh now. But, like, the line that he comes up with after that, huh, and it's like that little moment, I'm, like, obsessed with that moment, And despite the fact that, Lil Wayne is, like, in terms of commodification. Like, you can't, like, kind of get more commodified than that right now. But I still feel as though there's art and there are things to be mined and things to be found and things that are inspiring to me as a writer in the things that he's doing. And so I just feel like it's possible, you know, for art to just
Yeah. Oh, I think,
and
I
to
definitely think. I mean, of course, it's
survive.
possible. We're
Yeah.
doing
We're
it.
doing it, yeah.
But I think that, you know, language is so much in the service of consumption, and our entire, you know, political and financial reality is built around this idea of consumption. And we've all agreed to believe it. I mean, this financial meltdown of bailout, whatever, you know, happened, it's sort of like, you know, I think we have to start realigning what we believe is value, basically, you know. I feel like you said fresh and you felt old school. Like, I feel old school because I feel like going back to some Marxist ideologies that we kind of, you know, sort of like felt a little passé the last couple of, you know, last decade or so. And I feel like, oh, maybe, you know, like what makes, you know, what is that Henry Miller, what makes money make money? Like this idea of like, well, what is value actually? And I'm starting to think about all of these things. I know it doesn't have too much to do with poetry, but it seems really important. It seems connected in some way, the idea of money as a metaphor. Like, we've all agreed to believe that it's worth a certain thing. And we believe that because we want to function, and we believe that because we want to eat. But we also believe that because we want, and we want to want. You know, so it's complicated.
I'm with you, though, in terms of like kind of lining up your practices and stuff like that. One of the things that I thought was really cool this evening was that Em was here, and she and I have been working on so many different projects today, but like to just like that sense of, no, I'm actually not as jazzed or as turned on anymore about the notion of just the by myself aspect of the making of the poems. I really am interested in conversations right now.
So do you improvise it actually when you're writing it, when you go back and forth?
No, that poem is like is written. I wrote the poem and everything, and then shared it with Emily. But it became a different poem once it got into Emily's body, particularly given the poem and the subject matter and stuff like that, and the whole interacting with the poem. It like becomes a different thing to me, and I'm just more and more interested in that, and like in interacting with them. That's like really like super important to me right now. And so like that's, I don't know, it's big.
We were talking about, you know, your dissatisfaction or frustration with quantification and the capitalist sort of attitudes of American society today. Do you feel that poetry is able to address that and affect change in people's attitude? Do you think that, I mean, I was reading a blog the other day where someone was saying how they resent having to always defend poetry's right to exist and its role and relevance. And do you feel that you're in that position? Do you feel that poetry does have a relevance in society and an effect?
Well, I mean, definitely do, because every time we use language to try to communicate something about our spiritual or material actual material conditions, it goes against the grain of, you know, the language of advertising or the language of, you know, I was sitting in the cab and there was a screen on the back seat and it was like the fashion and talking about like what kind of bags are stylish now and stuff. So I think anytime you're reading something that is like more about the individual and how the individual connects with the universal, that is what written art is for, as far as, you know, for me. And so, you know, like you, I love to talk about this, you know, stuff, and I think it is related to political change and personal change. You know, Anais Nin actually had a wonderful and articulate disagreement with a dear friend of hers who was a Marxist critic, where she said that social change has to come from the individual, the universal. You know, she's the one, I think she's the person who said when the lunar landing landed something like, well, man has so much further to go within himself. But it's this idea of the individual psyche and needing to reconnect there in the most intimate of houses to start to bring about some of the social change. And I see poetry as very much a part of that, you know. And then there are poets who are out there who are doing work like Lucille Clifton's work, or Anne Waldman, or June Jordan, certainly, whose work had direct and real implications in public spaces, you know. And then some other people are doing smaller things, but that's definitely kind of one of the magnetic poles that I see that. I spent years as a political organizer before I ever started writing, and I definitely see this part still as an extension of that work, you know.
Yeah, and I mean the poems themselves are like, you know, they're out there doing their work. You said June Jordan, and immediately, I love this. When this happens, you say the name June Jordan, and it just passes through me. I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. My name is my own, my own, my own. And I don't know who the hell set things up like this. You know what I mean? It's just, it just comes. And like that is the, you know, the value. Until you want to talk about values and like, you know, not money, but the value of the poems and everything. That like kind of, you know, that thing that happens where those words just go through, or earlier you said something about something being the truth, and I thought, you know, and I who do not ride and do not swim, and would that I had never climbed his back, and love you too, you know, Carl Phillips, you know, and it's like that, what happens when I hear the word, it triggers like these other words that come, and then I feel like joy about being alive, and that, that's like,
you should just recite whenever if I say anything else, just interrupt me with the poem, yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, it's like a mouse over on the screen, when
yes.
and then the thing pops up.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Or I was just on a panel, and they were talking about technology. I love that you used that as an analogy, because, and I said to them, like, part of the job of the poet is to shove the meanings of words back into the words, and technology actually means discourse about the arts. You know, and it just has disappeared and everything, and I'm like, no, go OED, you know, it's like, that's what it means. But I love that as a mouse over, because that's kind of what's happening.
Yeah.
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 Okay, I'm gonna shift a little bit. I feel like I was reading the other day, just rereading this interview with Toy Darracott on Samsonia Way magazine, where she was adamantly declaring that we are not post-racial. And whenever, I feel like we're always having this conversation where the word post-racial comes up and everyone's like, no, you know, or has some very visceral reaction, which I always do as well. But I kind of was thinking about it in the context of poetry itself. I mean, this is, you know, we're all minorities up here, and, you know, this is a minority poetry organization, and I'm wondering about the idea of being post-racial in literature. Do you feel that that's something that we're going toward? Is it a goal? Is it something that's desirable or not? I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm curious about your relationship to that idea.
The whole post-race thing.
Could you go first?
Like, I'm so like whatever about it. You know, it's just like when people say that stuff to me, I'm like, okay, well, you know, I guess you're trying to get some kind of weird response out of me, but I'm like, I wake up, I'm black all day, every day, you know, and I love that. And it's like, you know, how they like do those tests, like the different tests and everything, if you could be like whatever. I'm a black woman and choose to be a black woman. If I could, you know, could choose to come back as something, it would be a black woman. I love being a black woman. And so, like, I do. It's just, it's good. And so, to me, and so I think people are yearning for a thing that is, maybe they're yearning for a different thing than the thing that I want. Like, I want to be able to have conversations with people. I want to be able to talk to someone and not worry about them killing me because of this, you know, and that's important to me. But like that whole, I've never understood that whole going for a colorblind society. It's always been confusing to me, because I'm like, why do you have to like erase me to be able to talk to me? I would like to still be in my body and in my be who I am, and still have you be able to have a conversation with me. I don't want to like disappear into something else for you to be able to have a conversation with me and not kill me. And so, I don't know, I find it confusing. Maybe somebody can explain it to me in some way that makes some sense. Nobody's ever explained it to me in a way that has made any well, some sense, but any good sense, as my great grandmama would say to me, like in a way that made good sense. I don't get it.
I just, to say something very quickly that is a little bit off the topic of that, but it has to do with this idea of post-racial. One of the one of the criticisms that Malcolm X had with the civil rights movement was, you were talking about creating equal access to like commercial venues without addressing kind of like the roots of racism that are about resource control, and specifically he connected it to international solidarity movements, and he gave this brilliant speech. It's in that book, Malcolm X Speaks, but he basically talked about cobalt, nickel, and industrial diamonds that Africa was providing, and he talked about these little he said, you think about the diamonds on the wrist, but really it's about industrial diamonds, because without those industrial diamonds, you couldn't do any of this stuff. And so he basically said that a U.S. civil rights movement that does not have an like international solidarity component, it's like, what does it give you, And so that was his criticism of that. And so in Slavoj Žižek's new book, he actually does this whole long critique of all of the protest movements of 1968, including the French protest movements. And he sort of said, we won all these little victories that helped to sort of like, you have the same power hierarchical society, you just have integration along the levels of it, but that doesn't really change, hasn't liberated actually. It just said that, okay, now there are people of color who can also be rich and exploiters, and you have equal access to that, but it hasn't addressed the kind of root issue. And so when you say post-race, it's like, okay, well maybe it's post-race in that old school way of like, I get to go to college now and I can do this and I can do that, but not really addressing the fundamental issue. And it goes the other way very quickly and very fast, because Muslim men of any color, but mostly of darker colors, now have the new switch on them in terms of all of the different kind of things that are happening all over the world, and people being detained, and this rendition, and all of this stuff. So this thing can flip. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that that Japanese people in this country were interned and lost all of their property. There has been no compensation for that. There's been no recognition of that. Lots of people got very wealthy off of confiscating their property and taking over their businesses. There has been no idea that anything is owed to those people, or African people of African descent in the United States. You know what I mean? Or Native American people who still have the mineral treaties that have the initial treaties that were agreed to by the native tribes, however long ago, like those mineral treaties are not being followed. Although if there is a white-owned, Disney company that wants to extend the copyright law, and every piece of copyright law is based around the whims of this one company keeping its intellectual property. So it's like mountains can be moved for the sake of the white dollar, but do you see what I mean? So everything about the current society is based on race and on race superiority. It's just cloaked or presented in a different way, but all of those issues are still there. I mean, tell me when the United States government will pay back the Lakota people for the uranium that was mined, and then I will believe it, you know what I mean? So it's, it's still, everything is still based on race. Yeah. To me,
Even literature.
The bombing of Baghdad. Yeah, I know, she's like, let's take it back to poetry. Somehow, God help us, even literature, even poetry, of course. There's the answer.
Well, that's where my cynicism starts coming in, because then I start feeling like when the earth shakes us off like a bad cold, and I'll be like, yes, we deserve it. You know what I mean? It's just also, there gets to be a point, I mean, I do get cynical where I just get to the point where I'm like, it's all so dumb. It's ridiculous. All of the stealing and raping and killing and all of that stuff so that we can build more stuff. And it's just like, it's dumb. I mean, I know that's like a crazy, oversimplification, but really, it is. It just seems like this is dumb to me. And it's like, you can go into all of the theoretical and all of that about it, which I did for years, and now I'm just like, this is stupid. And I'm bored of it.
Yeah.
I'm bored of racism.
Me too.
I hate it.
Okay, I promise I'll talk about poetry with the next question.
Okay,
whatever
great.
you ask me,
All right, so I think,
even if it's about politics.
okay, this is not going to be about politics. I'm just thinking lately about, there seems to be sort of an opposition of these two different ideas of poetry, one of them being more narrative and one of them being more conceptual. And I see people kind of going to one side or the other, feeling like they cannot be together in one poem. Do you feel that that's true, that there are two different ideas, or are you very much like this is a unified thing? I see Lyrae's kind of freaking out.
No, because I'm like, again, it's like
Yeah.
these arguments are so crazy to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you're a poet, why would you not use every tool that you had in your poetry toolbox to make a poem? It's dumb. Like, come on. Like, if the poem wants to be, no, seriously, because I get so frustrated because we like have these fights, and it's like the poetry wars, and I'm
These
on this
received
side,
ideas
and
that it has to be
I'm
one
on
way or
this
the
side,
other.
and like I only write this kind of poem, is like the language poem versus the you know, and so forget those formal poems and everything. And I'm like, that's the craziest shit I ever heard. It really is to me, because I just don't. I'm like, I want to make a poem. If that poem like needs to be like in this form, or like needs the narrative, or needs to like abandon narrative and stuff
Right.
like that, then I'm just like, okay, I'm trying to make a poem. Why would I fight you over that?
Right.
Any more than I would like.
But I think it matters as a writer what intention you go into a poem with, and I think that one of the things that this disagreement can do is sort of shut down or shut out a certain kind of approach or something like that. And so I was at this just a month ago. I was in New York for the Academy of American Poets, the Chancellor's Forum, and there was a discussion on wild and strange language between Carl Phillips, Kay Ryan, and Lynn Higinian was the other person. And they were sort of arguing, Carl and Kay were sort of presenting this idea of the poem as a transcendent experience. A poem, you are disorganized and reorganized by the poem. And Lynn Higinian said, but maybe sometimes a poetry is a piece of music, or maybe sometimes poetry is a game, or maybe sometimes poetry is like this. Like why, why is that idea of, and I talked about this idea of spiritual transcendence at the beginning, but why does that always have to enter into it? And the other two disagreed. There was no confluence between them. But Lynn brought up Gertrude Stein, and she said, and I think Gertrude Stein is a writer that has terrific range. I mean, there's some pieces that are completely essayistic, and there's thesis, and it really with great intention, and then there's other pieces that are completely, And so she said, what about her really deep language experiments? I mean, don't you see the pleasure and the excitement in all of those things? Those two poets didn't, but this poet that I've been communicating, who is a Lakota poet, her name is Layli Long Soldier. She's a brilliant writer. Please look up her work on the internet. Layli is Layli, then her last name is Long Soldier. She talked about this concept of the jingle dress. And the jingle dress was a sort of indigenous women's dress that had pieces of metal that actually made a sound. And so the dress was experienced visually when you saw the reflection, but it was also experienced orally. And so she talked about Layli talked about Gertrude Stein as an influence on her, sonically and also visually as something to look at, as well as an actual reading experience. So I think there's like lots of many different ways to experience poetry and language that's completely separated from the sort of like the self or the narrative or the traditionally lyric, you know what I mean?
I completely agree with you,
Yeah.
and I'm for them. But it's like that whole like kind of setup of like having that argument about it. I'd rather eat some cornbread. I am dead serious
And
about
read a
that.
poem, and read a
a poem.
I
And
just
talk
heard-
to my friends.
I know.
Like I really rather would, you
Yeah.
know? It's like, and I would love if the people are gonna like talk to me about like, oh, well, this is what did like that story. Now I'm like, I'm gonna look up the jingle dress. Yay,
jingle
I'm
dress,
for that.
yeah.
But I'm not like gonna fight you and be like, no, I'm against the jingle dress, and like there's no poetry in the jingle dress. That seems crazy to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. I'm that girl.
I feel like but I think it seems to me that the attitude is becoming more inclusive, like you're saying.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, we'll just make it happen.
Okay.
We're talking about your ideas of poetry and everything. I'm thinking more now about your idea of a book and how you write. Do you write toward a book, and how do you feel? What makes a collection of poetry a book for you?
I'm always writing a book, which is, I don't know if that's odd or what. Usually when I talk to people, it's not their process. But like, I have the book, I know what the cover is going to look like, I know what the title is going to be. I'm filling in poems into the book as I'm writing, which is probably why I write so doggone slow, and my peers can put out 3 books in the time that it takes me to write one. Because I feel like one of the things that keeps me writing poetry and interested in poetry and frustrated about poetry is every time I sit down to write a poem, I feel like I do not know how to write a poem. I don't know how to write a poem? Dang. And it's like, you would think after all these years that I would know how to write a poem, probably because I haven't picked a side. Because I'm like, the jingle dress, I have to write that down. Well, look up the jingle dress.
I know,
But I know, like, okay, if I have like a book as an idea, then I can like go and do all of this stuff and research and everything and come up with things that are gonna fit in there, and then eventually it comes together and I send it to someone if someone makes me, after 7 years, put that together. But I mean, that's my process.
I guess I kind of do both. I mean, sometimes I'm just writing poems and poems and poems, and I don't know what it's going to. I guess I do both and neither of what. I don't do at all what you do, which is that kind of idea of a book and then filling in the poems. I think I just write poems, and then some things coalesce, and then there's some unity or some magnetism happens, and certain poems clump together and other ones fall away. But there have been other times when I definitely had a project that I wrote quickly. So Bright Felon, I knew exactly what I was going to do. There was sort of an outline, and I wrote it in 5 months or 6 months. And then I have this book that's coming out next year that's about fasting during Ramadan, and I just decided to keep a journal during Ramadan, and so I kept a journal during Ramadan. And then I did it again for another year, and so the book is 2 months of Ramadan, you know? So I guess sometimes there's projects that I can work on really fast, and I like those little books, like short books, you know, poetry books that are, you know, between 30 and 45 pages, like quick shots. And I love short prose forms as well, prose books that run between 60 and 100 pages, kind of scratch my itch, I guess you could say. And so I like that idea of like really fast writing in prose, although in poetry I find it takes me also, like you said, like a very long. The manuscript that I read from tonight, that Icarus, those poems, which are not solely about Icarus, but that stuff is ranging over the course of about 10 years back to absolutely now. So it just sort of, I think it goes both ways. Some things take a long time, and then some things grab you quickly, you know.
All right, so I'm going to open up for questions now from the audience. If anybody has a question, just raise your hand, and someone will run over to you with a mic. If not, I'll just ask more questions.
I forgot that we're recording because I swore.
Oh, I did too.
Allison.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh, yeah, Lyrae, I know you've been working in prisons for a while, and I wonder if you could talk about how that informs your own artistic process, and just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's really funny. I don't know where she went, but Hetty Jones was sitting next to me in the front, and she's actually the reason why I work in prisons. I took a graduate workshop with her back in, she reminded me this evening, 1995, and she told me about her work in the prisons, and then I started teaching at the prison that was up the road from the graduate program at Penn State where I was, and then after I came back from the Peace Corps, I taught juvenile delinquent girls in the DC metro area for 3 years before I got to Cornell, and now I teach in the men's prison in the Cornell Prison Education Program. And I think it's really important to me in terms of, you know, not like kind of falling into this sense of it's part of my resistance to those types of conversations, and it's why I said specifically I'd rather eat some cornbread, because like my life growing up and my experiences are so like in some ways far-flung from academia and that whole life and that whole business, and I don't want to get so comfortable in academia that I forget that people are locked up. for messed up reasons. And I don't want to forget that. I don't want to get so comfortable that I forget that feeling of entering a prison and having those gates closed behind you, and that sound and that feeling of being in there, of being like, even when you go in to teach, you are locked up, you know, and people are living their lives locked up, and that's real, you know. And I'm not taking anything away from academia in terms of saying that it's not real, but in terms of my own politics and stuff like that, you know, it would be really bad if I forgot that was happening. And if I didn't have access to that in terms of the poems that I was making or you know, things that I thought were important to speak about out in the world. And so, I mean, that's part of the reason why I do that. I feel like there, but for the grace of God, you know, over and over again, I had good teachers who were just like, let me just pluck you up. But I was, you know, I'm part of a system that, because I was labeled quote unquote gifted when I was a little girl, everything that I did that was bad was because I wasn't being challenged enough. Whereas there are plenty of young men out there who are gifted, but everything that they do that's bad isn't being seen like that. And so they're being shunted right into the jail, you know, and that's something that it's imperative to me to stay, you know, connected to that as a reality of being part of these United States of America.
Speaking about, you know, you're talking about how maybe you would get kind of comfortable in this in academia, and that's like part of the reason why you want to go out and teach in prisons. Do you think that, I mean, a lot of poets these days are in academia. Do you think that affects the poetry that's produced? Do you kind of wish that people would do something similar and push themselves out of that world? Do you find that both of you have to do that in order to keep yourself in touch with some other you know, audience or reader, or just, you know, in general, just in touch with what's going on outside of this world of academia, which is a very kind of specific culture?
I don't want to say that about what other people should do, because I don't feel like it's my place to say what other people should do. I know myself, I like comfort a whole lot. I like it. You know, I like to sleep well. I like good food. I like, you know what I mean? And there is a part of me that, and I don't deny myself that. I'm like, I like comfort. I love it. But I don't want to forget that there are people who are locked, you know, as I'm living this comfortable life as the girl who was like a truant and stole my teacher's car when I was 15, like literally stole it, you know, and went off to the drop zone to hang out and watch the skydivers all day and stuff, that there are people who, you know, if they had stolen their teacher's car, you know, would be somewhere else. While I'm in this comfort, I don't want to be unaware of that. But I don't feel like, I feel like everybody, you know, should do the thing that they like. Look at yourself, like, seriously. And here's like my mama and the Pentecostalism coming out and everything, where it's like, look at yourself and do the thing that you know that you're supposed to do. That you're supposed to do. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You know what you're supposed to do. So
I can see that carries over into a lot of your attitude about poetry, and, you know, you're doing what you do, and you can, you know, whoever else wants to do, they can do their thing, and
don't shoot me for it.
Yeah. Don't shoot me for it.
Yeah, don't shoot me for it, and I won't shoot you for it. I'm not going to banish you to hell either.
All right, if we don't have any other questions, I'll just keep on with my conversation for a couple more questions. I remember in your book, Bright Felon, there was a line in one of the poems there where you said how, you were talking about how you pick poems, and you said, what do I really want to share with people? And I was thinking about that line, that really struck me, kind of in relationship to like the poet's relationship to the reader, and also the impetus to write, you know, to share. Do you feel like, I kind of just, maybe you just talk about that line a little bit, and, you know, what that means for you.
Well, in the case of Bright Felon, I was breaking a silence. including to myself. And so what concerned me during the writing of that book was, will the sharing of an essential secret, even though I've lived openly for many years, but not just the sharing of an essential secret, but also the writing about, maybe writing autobiographically at all, I don't know, but just that idea of sharing secrets or writing about myself, would that spend the source of silence? Were the poems that I was writing coming from the pressure created by the silent secret space? So Muslim mosques are empty inside, there's no trappings. And in a house, usually the prayers will just happen in a living room or a dining room or wherever there's space, you move the furniture and the daily room is transformed. But if you are a Muslim of a certain wealth status, you might have enough room in your house where there's a room specifically for prayer only. So it's this idea of prayer being a secret place or an open place or a transformed space, and the telling of a secret being the same way. So would the poems then evaporate? Would I be able to write poetry at all after I finished writing Bright Felon, and especially after I published Bright Felon, which I eventually was, I sent it out and then someone wanted to publish it and it was kind of like, oh shit, And so I don't really know how to solve that, except that I made a deal with myself, which was I wrote, I took a couplet of American poetry that was really important to me, and a friend translated it into Urdu and wrote it out as calligraphy, and we put the calligraphy on the cover. And so I felt like, okay, so there's a secret on the book, like, that I still have, that's kept. And I knew if someone happens to be able to read Urdu, they will look at that line and read it. They'll read it in Urdu, they might not. It would take someone who could read Urdu and who really knew American poetry to be able to identify that line of poetry. And I felt like if there is someone who can do that, then I want to know that person.
Yes.
So.
That's awesome.
So there's a promise, and there's a promise on the cover of the book, a friend I've yet to meet.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. You said if the poem like ran through me again to say, you kept saying the house, and so I kept hearing Miss Lucille. If I stand naked in my own house and press my windows, press my breast against the glass, and the man come to stop me, saying I've offended him, I've offended his gods. Anybody know that poem, Lucille Clifton poem? Like,
let him run through the streets, crying, speaking in tongues.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that when your book had gotten accepted, it was kind of like, a surprise. And I kind of wondering about the experience of writing before the first book and then writing after the first book. Do you feel like your relationship to publishing has changed, or your relationship to your writing has changed? Did something shift for you after that first book came out?
Anais Nin had this dream on the eve of the publication of her diary, this sort of famous dream where she opened the door and this radiation came and swept through her and she fell backwards and she died. And it was sort of about this question of exposure. But I think she was also tapped into some subterranean currents, because that is around the time her cancer first started as well, that eventually killed her. So I think she was sort of both of those things. But definitely, with the Far Mosque and the 40th day, I was trafficking so much in the idea of the fragment and the thing that I was not saying. It was so much a part of my poetics that I didn't feel as worried about it. After Bright Felon, yeah, I had that worry. I was kind of like, wow, I'm really sharing a lot. I'm really telling a lot of sordid, tawdry, personal things. I'm becoming very ordinary. I mean, I had this kind of poetics that was informed by the Arabic and Urdu poetry that I'd listened to when I was growing up, where poetry was definitely like this high art, this sort of diction and the pronouncements, the Agha Shahid Ali, type of poetry, that this was the kind of poetry I really loved. Even Lucille's poetry, which is really like conversational and in, what do you say, dialect or something like that, it still has this sort of pronouncement and sort of really crafted line, and those types of super kind of conversational, breezy, chatty poems, I was never very interested in as a reader, nor did I ever want to write anything like that, and so to get into this thing where I'm just like writing about my life and like walking to the graveyard and whatever those things that I was doing in there, and it gets more quotidian than that, it gets practically, very, daily life kind of stuff. And I just thought, like, God, what happens to the poetry after this, So I don't know the answer to that question, but I think I found myself, as a response, becoming, like, more hermetic and more kind of musical and stuff like that. So I think it's okay to swing on the pendulum a little bit and write different kinds of things.
Yeah. Black Swan, I always felt like somebody told me once that the first book is the book that you have to get out of the way before you can like kind of write anything else. And it kind of definitely felt that way for me with Black Swan. But then there was a lot of like kind of pain and stuff being associated with that book because it's got a lot of private stuff and bad stuff about my childhood. My childhood was pretty hard and pretty messed up, and bad things happened. And like writing those bad things down, you know, was like, yeah, were it not for Lucille Clifton's voice, and were it not for Toy, and were it not for June Jordan with saying I'm not wrong, you know, wrong is not my name is my own, then I don't even know that I would have been able to write that book. And frankly, I don't know that I would have been able to publish that book had both my parents have died. My parents are dead. And so there's a kind of a, you know, my mama's not going to read that book.
Right.
You know, in the second book, I went so like in terms of like thinking about Miss Lucille and thinking about my name and all of that and the research that I was doing. So like in another direction, I feel like that as I was writing it in the 7 years between Black Swan and Open Interval, I didn't know if anybody was even going to read or get it, or I was just kind of writing poems, you know, like to fill that book up. But I just didn't, I mean, you could have bought me for a nickel at the response to that book because I didn't know that anybody was going to, you know,
Yeah.
I was just kind of like, okay, I'm writing these poems. I'm driving past the prison again. I got to write that poem down. And so I don't know.
So you find that you're concerned if people are going to get it, or you just got to write it and you just write it down?
Clearly, I just got to
Yeah.
write it because I was writing it anyway, and I didn't think that. I was like, you know, like the whole trying to like get all that you were saying, the whole universe in the body. You know what I mean? It's like, let me just shove the whole universe into here, and failing, but like, you know, compulsively like trying to like get the universe back down in there. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm in that same space now.
Yeah.
This book with all of its crazy overlap of the banjo, which again, I know people kind of look at me, you know, cockeyed, or I don't know that. I feel that. That's a self-consciousness coming out. Like, but like, what you doing? Writing about the banjo, right? Because that's mine. And I want it still. In 2010, I want the banjo.
Yeah. Okay.
Take mine. You know, and so, but like the banjo, and then like, oh, okay, well, if that's not bad enough, porn. Let's throw some porn studies in there, you know, if that's not bad enough. And then let's see if we can have some conversations with Lil Wayne, you know, and throw that in there. And if that's not bad enough, then, you know what I mean? And so I just kind of feel like, I don't know.
Well, it seems to be working for you.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. If it takes 7 years.
Worth the wait, definitely. We have one question.
You've touched on musicality quite a bit, and I'm really curious about how, say, the Pentecostal tradition or the Muslim tradition and the aspects that are musical in it show up for you now in your writing, if at all.
Well, for me, definitely. I mean, not Bright Felon because I wrote it in prose, but my other books of poems and the poems that I read to you for my new manuscript are always written sort of out loud and pronounced. And the first poetry I heard was Arabic poetry that I don't understand Arabic, and so I only heard the sounds of it. And Arabic has all of these consonants and vowels that don't exist in English, so it was sort of like a different sound almost. Very beautiful, beautiful language. And so when I hear Lucille Clifton or someone like that who's really not using traditional regular metrics, but is using rhythm, and who understands better than I the hunger in old bones for a son? I mean, it's choreambic, actually. Heavy stress, light stress, light stress, heavy stress, heavy stress, light stress, light stress, heavy stress, heavy stress, light stress, light stress, heavy stress. Who understands better than I the hunger in old bones for a son? you know, it's very powerful. It just, you talk about it going through you, it goes right through me, you know.
Yeah, music is really big for it. Again, I'm trying to kind of pull from as much as I can. Right now, the banjo is huge because one of the things that I wanted to get at, one of my colleagues said once in a faculty meeting, and I've stolen it and I use it everywhere. Like, one of the jobs of a poet is to take the ineffable and F it.
That's pretty awesome.
That.
That's a good one.
You know, take the ineffable and F it. And so I wanted to kind of write about how every time I heard a banjo, I was like, yes, that music speaks to me. Like, I want that. Where is that coming from? Like, what is the deal with that? I mean, it literally took that, happening to kind of go back and kind of trace the history and be like, well, of course, duh. But that kind of happens a lot.
I sometimes wonder about past lives and stuff like that, because the kind of music that really gets to me is, I lived in Washington, D.C. also for many years when I was organizing, and outside the subway stations there are always the guys who are playing the Andean flutes, do you know? Yes. And it I have a really, deeply emotional response where I start weeping. And it sounds cheesy, but even in the subway stations here, when there's all the crazy people, when I hear that sound, it's I can barely breathe.
Yeah.
It's very strange. And so I wondered about I don't know, I have no connection culturally, so it's, except.
I believe in that stuff though. I had to go out and buy a banjo. I am learning to play the banjo. I had to go and buy one,
yeah.
And I would go into these the music stores and touch these old banjos from the 1800s and everything, and just feel feel that, where has this thing been? Who was playing this?
Yeah.
And that, I'm believing it.
I wanted, because I believe music so much can be access the inner unstable spirit. I really wanted to learn to play the sitar, but I'm such a bad student. I sat in there for an hour, with a bunch of other students and the teacher and I just, after an hour, it just went way over. And I was walking out of the class with another student. And so I teach at Oberlin, where all these kids are these musical prodigies or whatever. But this kid was not a music major, so I didn't feel intimidated by him. And I said, wow, I don't think I'm going to come back next week. That was really hard for me. I don't really understand. And I don't even play the guitar. And the sitar, the guitar only has 6 strings, and the sitar has 12, And he just looked at me with this look on his face. And he was like, yeah, but you're really only supposed to be plucking 1 string. And I felt after an hour of instruction with this woman, with only 7 other students, I hadn't even picked up that you're only supposed to be plucking 1 string. So I don't think actual musical instruments are really in my future.
But then do you do stuff like that just to get pumped? Like me, I'm gonna buy this banjo and I'm gonna get some poems. Or now I have this thing where I feel in trying to teach myself over and over again how to write a poem, that if I learned to dance, if I could dance, that I could write a better poem.
Yeah.
And I've been watching that there are all these things on YouTube. There's this woman, her name is Luam. I think she teaches somewhere here at Broadway Dance Center or something like that. She's a choreographer. And I've been watching all of these little snippets from her class of people dancing. And I'm like, well, that's why I can't write this poem. I need to learn to dance to write this
it's
poem.
what you learn from structure out of the body, the physiology of the body, and also with painting, for example, Hans Hofmann, what I learned about poetic structure by looking at this painting and this idea of the abandonment of classical perspective and this new thing that he was calling push-pull, and what happens in a poem when you start to do lines that do that kind of thing. So I completely agree, and what from sound also, how you can build the soundscape of a poem.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was really a great question. That really was very fruitful. But that's all we have time for. I want to thank you guys so much for coming out and having this great conversation and reading your beautiful work. And invite everybody to stay, buy some books, chat with the authors, and fill out our surveys, and have some refreshments. Thanks so much for coming.